Hey, it's Siva, and sorry, I can't do the lecture in Russian. Sorry, this is English, so I hope you're okay. Okay, so thank you for Alex and for Tatiana and others for inviting me. And it's nice to see old friends again, like Artem and others as well, which is great. So what I'm going to do is give an overview, and what I want you to take from this is how important marine stations are. And I don't know how many of you have visited marine stations or had a job or worked at a marine station, but a lot of what we do is trying to promote their value. And one of the things what I'm going to do essentially is firstly just talk about societal challenges. So that's in my talk. I talk about how we're going to help society, but what are those challenges? Then this is the main bit of my talk, what marine stations do, teaching outreach, research, and long-term observations. Then I want to talk about the networks, and then quickly mention WANs. So that's going to be my talk, and I'm hoping I'm happy to stay at the end and answer questions if you want. So let's think about the societal challenges first of all. And I think, to be honest, you can't talk about challenges now without talking about the global climate emergency. This is the big thing that everybody's concerned about. So recently in the UK, the Parliament declared a climate emergency. You've got lots of school children now. You all know Greta Thunberg and that, but there's school children everywhere who are concerned. You've got a very high level, so this is the Mayor of Paris declaring a climate emergency. And at the moment, they reckon there are about 16 different countries, about 749 municipalities, 138 million people. It's really taking off. So we have a big problem with climate change. So I'd say that's one of our major societal challenges. And of course, from the marine perspective, what that means is we're seeing huge changes in the ocean system, but we're also seeing potential for more change. So if you look here, this is where we are at the moment, about 1 degree above pre-industrial temperatures. And you can see already that we're starting to see an effect. So these are a transition from all of these marine parts of the ecosystem just being normal to them starting to be impacted. So straight away, we're seeing impacts on warm water corals, think about coral bleaching and that sort of thing. Kelp forests are starting to shift and see seagrass and kelp be affected by climate change. But the important thing is at the moment we're on a trajectory for this 1.5 or 2 degree increase, and right across the board then you're starting to see serious impacts on all of these habitats. And I'm sure you're all aware that at the moment this is the big discussion. If the temperature keeps going up, then the impacts eventually, if we let it get to 3 or 4 degrees, are profound. We will see really profound changes across the system. And of course, it's if you look at what is it, what do we mean by the effects? Well, one thing we're already seeing is the proliferation of dead zones in the ocean. These are toxic zones where essentially, if you look at a local example here, so often in a local waterway, you'll get a lot of nutrients, a lot of algal buildup, all the oxygen is consumed and everything dies. And this is millions and millions of fish that just die because of the lack of oxygen. Now what we're seeing is these dead zones in the ocean that are getting deeper, they're getting bigger, and they're really expanding in response to temperature. So what I'm trying to say is these impacts are fairly profound. And it's not just climate change. Climate change is one impact, but this was a very famous paper by Ben Halpern in Science, 2008, where they modelled all the different impacts in the ocean, and they modelled whether they were high or low impact. And you can see that there were some areas where the impacts from everything from fishing to pipelines and drilling to building and coastal reclamation, the impacts are really profound. In fact, the worst place in the whole study we seem to be the UK, in the north, so there you go. But you can see here that all around the globe, we are having an impact on our ocean. And a few years later, a few years later, Ben Halpern updated all of this, I'd also make the point that you've got cumulative impacts. And this is really important in terms of the ocean, because you're not just dealing with climate change or just dealing with fishing or just dealing with land reclamation. All of those things work together and you get a cumulative effect of all these impacts. And what this is showing here is that pretty much all around the world, we're seeing an increase in these impacts. So sea surface temperature I've already mentioned, but we have huge problems with too many nutrients in places like China, US and the UK, and obviously fishing, which is another huge problem. So it's not just climate change, there's all sorts of impacts on our ocean. And I think I've used the term societal challenges because this isn't just about what's happening for scientists or conservationists. This actually affects society itself. So this paper here has actually split all the impacts up into different areas: fisheries, agriculture, human health and tourism. And what this is doing is starting to make a link. So actually, the fact that our fisheries are in trouble isn't just of interest to scientists, obviously it's of interest to people all around the world, because we're developing agriculture now, but agriculture is having all sorts of problems because of climate change. So for instance, in the UK, there's been problems with jellyfish blooms harming agriculture farms, and there's all sorts of problems there. There's human health risks, so marine vibrios, there's a lot of interest in these now. So you get vibrio cholera that causes cholera, but there's other forms of vibriosis, which are very serious. And both in Europe and the UK, but also around on the Western Pacific, we're seeing more cases of disease. So there's disease is building up because of temperature. So this is a really important message. What happens in the ocean isn't just of interest to ocean scientists, it's affecting all of society. And I think there's an ethical issue in this as well. So if you look here, this was published in The Economist, but it was taken from a paper actually in Science Advances. And what this is showing is, if you look at all the rich countries over here, so Russia and US and Britain we're the sort of wealthier nations on this side, and these are the poorer nations, mainly sub-Saharan Africa, but also bits of South America. What's happening is, this is a stability index. So actually, we're not suffering as much as other countries. So we are seeing some change in the climate and things like that, but the real instability, the real big changes that are occurring are changing in these very poor nations. The reason that's important, of course, is they don't have the capacity to respond and mitigate like we do. So when something's happening in a wealthy country, if you have sea level rise, you can build seawalls, you can use engineering and technology. You can change if the fish change. So if all of a sudden the species of fish changes because of sea temperature, if you're a wealthy country, you can upgrade your fishing fleet, you can buy new boats. If you're an artisanal fisherman or fisher person in Africa, you can't afford just to buy new boats and new fishing gear because all the fish have changed. So, it's a societal problem at a global level. So I think ultimately, my message from the first part of the talk is healthy oceans, happy people. Or if we want to be depressed, bad oceans, sad people. I mean, whichever way you want to look at it. But it's really important we get this message, because what I'm trying to do as president of MARS, this network of marine stations, is to say that what we do as marine scientists is really important for society. It's not just about publishing a journal or writing a book. It's about helping society, alleviating poverty, feeding people. It's all of those things. So that's an important message to take home. And obviously, at the international level, it's the United Nations who are really pushing to fix a lot of these things. And I'm sure you're all aware of the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 of these goals, and recently they did a report to say, how are we doing? How's every country in the world doing at meeting these goals? And the ones that came out worse, the ones that were not meeting very well, are climate, which you probably probably be not surprised by. Life on land is biodiversity terrestrially, but also Sustainability Development Goal 14, life below water. We're really not actually hitting all our targets on this. So we've got a lot to do, and there are a lot of challenges for society. So, on that, why do I think marine stations are not the answer, but part of the answer to meet all of these challenges? Well, for a start, I don't know. I mean, put your hand up here if you visited more than 3 marine stations. Okay. Put your hand up if you've ever been to 2 marine stations. Yeah, okay, there's a few of you. Most people are only ever kind of engaged with 1 or 2 marine stations, maybe where they have a job, where the university is, they go on a course. But the fact is, there are hundreds of these. So this is a map. This was from the recent report, the Global Ocean Science Report in 2017. And it's estimated here that there are about 784 marine stations worldwide. It depends how you define the station. Another report has put it up to about 1,200. But either way, you've got this huge network of marine laboratories and stations all around the coasts and seas around our world. And my view is that this is a massive untapped resource in terms of meeting these challenges. And you can see here, the great thing about these stations as well is they're not just in one place. It's not like we've got 800 here and none there. You know, we've got, they're fairly well dispersed through Asia, Europe, North America. There's fewer in South America and Africa, but there are still marine stations all around. And this is really what I want to just spend a few minutes now talking about. So this is the report that diagram comes. It's the Global Ocean Science Report that the UN produced. And I just want to read this because what this report's trying to do also is let people know about what these marine research stations can offer. So marine field stations provide access to a range of environments, and I'll come back to that. So classically, most of them are built on the coast, on the coastline. The late 19th century was probably a big time for building them, but there's lots more. So if you want to have access to go diving, to do surveys, whatever, then marine stations is the place to be. They often have great facilities, which are platforms for research. They do a lot of educational and outreach, citizen science. And one thing I will talk about in a minute is long-term observation studies, because a lot of these, a lot of the marine stations are very old, and I'll come back to this in a minute, because what it means is a lot of them have got these fantastic data sets. As I said, I'll come back to this. I'm just going to unpack this just a little bit. So let's look at education and research first of all. So a lot of these marine stations, when they were set up, they were set up also with the aim of introducing people to that environment. A lot of you may have experienced your first dive or your first survey experience by going to one of these marine stations. And that's what they're designed for. I had the pleasure of joining some people down here in 2014 at the White Seas. There's me at the back, looking very happy. You can see it's great. But it was a really good experience, because this is what marine stations do. You know, they bring people, young students, and they train them. So they're doing a lot of educational work, but also they're doing a lot for the public. So the Marine Biological Association, which is what where I work in the UK, we opened an aquarium years ago, 100 years ago, and we used to run these Easter classes. So this is the public who would come, and all the men would come in their suits, the women in their nice dresses, and they would just go straight out. You see here them all fully on the shore, and they would learn about the marine environment. And this is very common in these marine laboratories. So you have the Anton Dorn Aquarium in Naples, which is still a very well-known aquarium and liked by the public. The Moat Aquarium in the US. I mean, these are just examples. Last year we went to the Откроет Aquarium in Crete, which is this huge public aquarium. So they've played a really important role. And a lot of the aquariums and sea life centres that are around the world are either part of these marine laboratories or they're strongly linked to it. So I think that's something we shouldn't underestimate. The other function is research. And what I want to do is give you a little story now, and it's a slightly old research story, but the reason I want to use this one is A, because it's where I work at the MBA, so I know about it, but also because it shows the value of working at more than one station, which I'm going to come back to, the value of a network. So in this guy here, Professor J.Z. He was working at the Anton Dorn station in Naples in the early 1930s. And while he was there, he was introduced to cephalopods. He didn't really know much about cephalopods, but because they were studying them in Naples, he got really excited about cephalopods and thought, great, I'm going to look into this a bit more. I might do some more research, partly because he was interested in fisheries initially. So he came back to Plymouth, so that's where I work, that's my office there, actually. Well, not the whole thing, just one room, but so that's where I work now. And what he did is he was studying cephalopods back in Plymouth, once again in the early 30s, and he found these giant nerve fibres. He didn't know what they were, first of all, these axons, but he was really excited because these were very large organisms. And he wanted to know a lot more about them. He didn't have all the skills that he needed, so what he did is he went over to Woods Hole. So he went over to the US, and he worked there on these giant nerve fibres, and they confirmed that they were actually nerve fibres. And that was really exciting because, of course, nerves are generally tiny, as you know, and all of a sudden you have this very, about this sort of size, this large nerve fibre that you could do research on and understand how they work. So he published this seminal paper, The Functioning of the Giant Nerve Fibres of the Squid. Then what happened is he came back to the UK, having done that, having worked with, and then people from here and here joined him back in Plymouth, and these guys, Alan Hodgkin and Andrew Huxley, they said, well, this is brilliant because we have happened to have an interest in how nerves work, but we haven't found any nerves big enough. They heard about this discovery of the giant axon in squid, so they came to Plymouth. They worked out how action potential works and how nerves function. And it was such an important discovery that they got the Nobel Prize for physiology or medicine. So what this is showing is, you can see here, all around the world, these different marine laboratories, they all give a little bit of the jigsaw. And they've all got something to add, and somebody moves between them, and they get this little bit of the big jigsaw here, and then an expert over here gives them this little bit of the jigsaw. And wouldn't it be great if all our stories ended up with the Nobel Prize? Who knows? Maybe some of you, in the future, Nobel Prize is where it will end up. And also, this is very important for society, because what they discovered is the basis of modern neurophysiology. So a very close friend of mine, he heads up psychiatry in the UK, and they actually teach about this because they began to work out how the brain functions, about nerve responses. So this is just, I think, a really lovely illustration of how marine laboratories are doing this fantastic research, which is also having, it's literally changing the world. It changed medicine, it changed brain, what we know about the brain and things like that. And then the final thing I want to really mention in terms of marine stations and their value, I mean, I could go on and on about why marine stations are great, but I just wanted to cover, I've done the education, I've done the research, but I also want to talk about this thing about long-term monitoring, particularly biodiversity monitoring. One of the reasons that the marine stations were often set up was because we wanted to know more about what was there. It's quite simple. And if you go to any marine station, eventually you'll probably find an old catalogue or a new catalogue or an ongoing catalogue of what exists in that area. So if you look here, you've got the Rostov Marine Station in the northwest France. And one of the first things they did is they have an inventory. These are the echinoderms here. These, I can't read it, so I've got my glasses on here, but that's another file, another group. But they've published a whole series of these. So what echinoderms are there, what Nemertians are there. And they've got a whole list of what exists in that part of France. The same with Naples, Anton Dorn. You often get these maps as well, so showing all the different biotopes, these fantastic lists of fauna. So not just what you find there, but all sort of the numbers and where they're found and the quantities and what depth. So this is really fantastic information. People have gone out there and collected everything. And once again, a couple I've included here the White Sea Station, with which Alexander directs, and Artem, you've been involved in a lot of this, but you can go on and find a catalogue of all the different things that you can find there, physical conditions, biological, and the same in Plymouth. So these laboratories have been really fundamental in just mapping and telling us what's there. Now, the exciting thing about that, of course, is that, okay, somebody might go out in the 1920s or the 50s, or in the UK, the first samples we were doing were in the sort of late 1800s. And at the time, people just looked at what was there and then forgot about it. But of course, what then happens later is we're suddenly realizing we have all these impacts, and we're asking the question, what has changed and why has it changed? So I'll give you an example from the UK. So this is Britain here, this is the southwest of Britain, and here is Plymouth, where I work. And this area, the Eddystone Rock, is a very famous, diverse part of the seabed here. It goes for about 80, 90 metres, and they wanted to designate it a marine protected area. But the question was, had it actually changed? Was it impacted? That's the question they were asking. Had it been impacted by fishing? So what they said is, how can we find out? Well, as it happened, we had all the original data that we collected from 1895, when people had gone out there and they had the old-fashioned diving helmets and the boats and all the rest of it, and they mapped the whole thing in 1895. What was even better, there was a naturalist dredge, and the actual dredge that had been used in 1895, we found in a shed in the lab, the same dredge, not a copy of it, the actual dredge. So it wasn't in perfect condition, so we had it reconditioned, but we were able to use exactly the same equipment, and we did a 100-year comparison, or over 100 years, and we published it here. This is the paper, Bentley Community Change over a century-wide scale. And what we found out, I won't go through the whole paper, is that there are a lot more of these sort of R-selective species, small worms and crustaceans, and we lost a lot of the larger stuff, and it was completely typical of the impact of an area that's overfished and suffering from dredging. So because of what the Marine Laboratory had done 100 years before, all of a sudden we're able to report 100 years later on impacts. So this is a really important element when it comes to these marine laboratories. So what we started to do then is think, well, actually, why don't we look across all of these laboratories and in Mars and see who's got what, to see where these inventories are, and actually, can we say how things have changed over time, but also how things are changing across a European scale. So early on, we were publishing these sorts of booklets, which were simply maps of all what we're calling biodiversity research sites. So this is where marine laboratories have got really good maps of what exists around their coastline from a certain time. And then about 3-4 years ago, we finished this project. So Mars managed to get some funding. A number of us here were involved in this. And what we did is we managed to go out and choose a lot of these sites, the hard substrate, soft substrate, pelagic sites, and actually do some resampling to actually look, to go back, to continue sampling if it was ongoing, or to do some sort of new sampling if it stopped. And it was really fascinating, because what it enabled us to do was then publish these papers where we're looking at variability between, for example, this one is Northeast Atlantic and Mediterranean rocky shores. So we're able to then publish papers to say, well, how does what living on a rocky shore change as you move from the North Atlantic down into the Mediterranean? And we were able to do the same on hard bottom communities. So this is another pan-European study. So we're looking at this fantastic way of looking at diversity over a very wide scale. And this is all because these marine laboratories have done this survey, and most of them are carrying on doing it. This is the important message. A lot of these laboratories have got these long-term time series, and they've had them for 100 years. Now, the problem today, I don't know what it's like here in Russia, but in the UK, part of the problem is that everybody's now excited about sexy technology and what's exciting, and it's all about satellites, and it's about AUVs and buoys with telemetry on, and it's all very exciting, and all the physicists and the space people get involved. But what's missing on this picture in terms of monitoring? Well, I'll show you. A marine lab. There we go. There's no, at the moment, it feels to me that everybody's really excited about all this technology, which is great. I'm all for it. Let's get all the technology out there. But they're forgetting about the role of these laboratories with basic biology, basic biodiversity. As I said, biodiversity monitoring, time series custodians, and I've mentioned the role of outreach. You can't really do outreach to the public if you've got a ship somewhere out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean or in the Arctic. These things will not fill the hole or fill the role that marine laboratories are currently doing. So that's why marine laboratories are important, because they do education and outreach, because of fundamental research, and because of their time series. So what am I now suggesting? How do we tap this untapped resource? Well, the answer to me has got to be networks. And this is really important because this isn't a new concept. So I've been using the term all the way through marine station. Well, why do we call them a station? It's because when Anton Dorn and Mikhail Maklai came up with the idea of building some of these stations, and the oldest ones Ostend in 1843, Concarneau, etc. The plan was to cover the globe with a network of zoological research stations analogous to railway stations. So the reason he called them stations is because of that research example I showed you. They were never supposed to operate in isolation. The idea of the station was you arrived, you got the bit of information or the expertise you needed, and then you would go on, like going to a railway station, you would go on to the next station down the coast or in another country or somewhere else, and you would build that jigsaw and you would work with other people. So the vital thing with marine stations is when they were set up originally, there was always planned to be a network that we would work together. That's where we get the greatest value. So, for example, when I came to the N.A.Percova station about 4 years ago, I discovered you had this fantastic biodiversity mapping and data sets and long-term time series. Well, I didn't know anything about this. I thought this is just a gold mine of data. And of course, to get the best value out of that, we're hoping, I guess, to bring some people over from various other places and start to look at how did that compare with data sets in the North Atlantic from Scotland or the UK or from Norway. So it's when we start working together, we get the maximum value. And occasionally people come up with this idea again. So Pierre Lasserre, who I've been having a few meetings with recently, they published this report, Marine Laboratory Networks, in 1985, where they started to say, look, we're not functioning as a network. We need to work together if we're going to win those Nobel Prizes, if we're going to meet societal challenges. Not a great deal happened after this. It was still the idea that we should work more together. There is another reason that it's now more important that we work together as well. I could ask you a question, but you probably don't know the answer of what all of these have got in common. So Port Erin Marine Laboratory was set up in the late 19th century, run by Liverpool University. NBL Woods Hole in the USA, very famous laboratory. Millport Marine Station in Scotland, set up in the late 19th century. Koalo Marine Lab. So what do these have in common? Anybody guess? Probably not. There we go. Closed down because ran out of money. Liverpool University decided to pull funding because they couldn't justify the expense. This one, the Hawaii Marine Lab, fights to stay afloat. This is constantly at risk. This lab have huge problems with money. So they're constantly battling to keep that going. Millport Marine Station was actually closed but then rescued. This is BBC News, saved the marine station, but it's not a marine lab anymore, it's something slightly different. This one, even in the USA, this had a lot of money, but it's now part of Chicago University because it nearly went bankrupt. So one of the problems is a lot of these marine laboratories really struggle to justify their existence. We know how important they are, but we're not very good at telling the people in power and the people with the money how important they are. And it's very easy for somebody like with here to just say, let's close it. Now, what happened here, they closed it. We also lost time series that were 120 years old. And overnight, those time series were just disappearing because it had been closed. So this is another sort of political reason, if you like, why we need networks. This was a comment which I liked in a paper in Bioscience. Biological field stations are at risk unless they modernise and better communicate their mission to policymakers, funders and the public. This is what WAMS is about. This is what Mars is about. It's about letting people know that you have these huge challenges, and we think marine laboratories are well placed to answer it. This was another report that was done in the US on the National Research Council. And once again, it says field stations are in jeopardy because of the lack of widespread recognition of their contribution. Leads to science and society, underuse and underfunding. Moreover, their remote locations, low overhead support, and verified affiliations can result in disparate research networks that have inconsistent operational and organisational cohesion. That's a very complicated way of basically saying they're out usually in the middle of nowhere on the coast somewhere, people don't know how important they are, and they're vulnerable to being closed down. That's what it boils down to. So there's a real strength. I'm really passionate about bringing this network together so that we have a voice to promote how important these laboratories are. And it also helps, going back to the funding, we need to be heard and we have a much stronger voice together. If you look at your average government minister and they have all these things they need to think about, problems with obesity and pensions and the environment, they're worried about everything. And actually what we're trying to say is this is really important. I wrote a piece for Research Fortnight last year where I pointed out the difference in spend. And this is my favourite example is from the US, where in 2017 they spent $481 million on marine research and $5.8 billion on space research for NASA. Well, from my point of view, NASA is exciting, it's fine, I've got nothing against space research, but actually in terms of meeting the immediate societal challenges I'm talking about, I would reverse this figure. I would like to see $5.8 billion on marine research. I'm sure you guys would as well. I would switch it around, but it is a problem at the moment. When we compare what's spent on marine with other areas of science, it's extremely underfunded. So it's easier with a common voice, and that's where we need a network. So to finish off, let me just see how long I've got actually, because I know we started late. Am I okay for another 5-10 minutes? Yeah, okay. So to finish off, I want to talk about what is the concept then? How do we get this network going? Well, this is what I'm chair of at the moment, which is Mars, and this is mainly European laboratories, although it's sort of geographically slightly wider. You can see here all the members. And we bring people together in order to promote the value of a network of marine stations. We're not the only ones to do it, so that's at the European level. I'll show you a couple more examples. So in Japan, you have the Japanese Marine Biological Association, and there's a nice special issue here which Kazuo and Yaba did, and this is showing the 20 or so key research stations in Japan, because they've also come to the realization fairly recently that they have to work together as a network. Because some of these stations are very big and really well funded, and some of them are absolutely like that one, and some of them are absolutely tiny and have 3 or 4 staff and are at risk. So different countries now and different places are really recognising the value of creating these networks. Another example of a network is this CARICOM, which is the Caribbean group. Now, this is a strange one because it's kind of finished in terms of being an official network, but the work carries on. So it was set up in 1985, and what they realised was that they were trying to get the most out of their monitoring, their long-term monitoring. And what they realised was when you look all around the Caribbean, these people here were focused on seagrass and sea temperature, and that's all they did. These people here actually also included the reefs. This group here also included mangroves. This group here, just did the reefs and the physical, and they were all doing slightly different things. And what they realised is if they actually all worked together, they actually had this huge sort of long-term time set covering the whole of the Caribbean area and covering the whole of the ecosystem. So between them, they were covering all the reefs and all the physical measurements and the chemical measurements and all of the mangroves and the coastal systems and all of the seagrass. And they published some really nice papers, and it says here some of the sites monitoring continues to this day, generating amongst the longest coastal monitoring data sets in the Caribbean, possibly in the world. So by getting together in the Caribbean and not working by themselves, they actually published some really nice work. There's a really nice paper that's just come out earlier this year, Key Findings and Lessons Learned, and it basically says, work together and you can actually say what's going on right across the whole Caribbean region, across the whole ecosystem over decades, as opposed to working by yourself when you can just say what's happened in your little bit of the sea for the last few years. So these, I won't go through any more examples. I just chose these three because they're quite nice examples. But it's just showing that everybody now is getting the value that we have to work together as marine scientists. So to finish off, the value of working together, I've mentioned quite a lot of this, achieve synergy through capacity sharing. So, sharing all the expertise, sharing facilities, things like that. To promote particular areas of research. So between us, every lab will have its own speciality, but between us, we cover everything. If you want a taxonomic expert, you go here. If you want somebody who's good on modelling and remote sensing, you might go here. If we work together, we cover everything. Then we've got things like supporting and training the next generation. I won't go into this too much because it was a UK example, but they actually produced a report of all the sciences to say what is the most challenging job and career path in the UK in terms of what you end up earning and things like that. And unfortunately for me, because it's my job, marine came out pretty badly. They basically said in the UK, do nuclear medicine, be a physicist or whatever, but be a marine biologist if you love it, because you're not going to be a millionaire being a marine biologist in the UK. Maybe it's different in Russia, that's fine, I don't know, but I always did marine biology because I love it and I'm passionate about it, not because it's made me rich, which it hasn't. And obviously the main thing of the network, like I said, is to have this common voice. And it's now feeding into have you all heard of the UN Ocean Decade or UN Decade for Ocean Science? Yep. So announced 2021, 2030. So one of the first things I did is I went to meet Vladimir Ryabinin, who heads up the IOC and is in charge of all of this. And he was really excited about getting all the marine research laboratories on board because they've got a vision for the decade to build infrastructure, foster partnerships. They've also got a key research priority, which is they want a comprehensive ocean observing system. They also have the problem in the United Nations that they don't really have any money. So what they're looking is what capacity is out there. So when I went to meet them and said, are you aware you've got 1,000 marine laboratories? And we're all excited about being involved. They were obviously very keen, and they're sponsoring and going to promote our meeting that we're having. One thing I would say we need to be better at, and maybe we can cover this at the WAMS meeting next year, is we do need to be better at quantifying the value of the contribution to marine science. So I'm telling you how important it is, and you're all sort of hopefully nodding and agreeing. But of course, when you go to a policy or a decision maker, the language they usually speak is the language of dollars, pounds, rubles, whatever it is. It's money. So there's actually quite a lot of work being done now. So there's a few papers here. I did a report for the Commonwealth on the value of ocean research and ocean observations. And you can see here, I mean, globally, so this is one of the estimates here, an overall value of ocean observations of between $10 and $20 trillion. Now, that doesn't relate exactly to what I'm talking about, because that isn't just about coastal biodiversity monitoring, that does include all your ships and your remote sensing. But what's happening now is people are starting to try and think, what is this actually worth? It helps us to plan and mitigate against our fisheries collapsing. Knowing what's going on in the future helps us to plan about sea level rise and how we protect against flooding. It helps us to deal with all these societal issues. So what you're getting more and more is countries trying to put a value on that. So the USA, they put about $1 billion per year. Australia, it's about $750 million per annum. So we need to get better at that because that's the language the politicians speak. And more now, we need to improve this message. You're seeing a lot of laboratories now. If you look at the labs, they'll have whole things about the blue economy and blue growth. We really need to get that message out there that actually marine laboratories and marine science is good for the economy. It's good. It protects us. It helps us to be prepared for future challenges, both in the ocean and beyond. So, very last thing. This is why next year, here in Moscow, in late October, we're going to be holding the first meeting of the World Association of Marine Stations. So it's a World Congress of Marine Directors. We're inviting marine directors from all over the world to come here to actually look at some of these issues we talked about today. And as I said, we've got quite a few people involved, from America and Japan, TMN in Australia, Pogo, Africa. And we're going to be inviting, we're hoping, as many of these people as possible to come along to establish this World Association. Originally, it was 2009, where IOC UNESCO supported the concept. 2011, it was signed off, but not a great deal happened. But we had a meeting in Paris last year, and IOC have agreed to support the plan for the World Association in support of the Ocean Decade. So, World Congress of Marine Directors behind in Moscow, October 28th, 29th, 30th. I hope you'll be hearing all about it and hearing about all the outputs and seeing everything. We're really excited because it's actually taking all these marine laboratories, directors and people and bringing them together to promote the value of these laboratories. The idea, once we establish it, is that then we'll have all of these stations connected to each other. Embedded in wider monitoring and research frameworks, communicating to policymakers, and the recognition of the value of stations and time series will lead to better resourcing. If it all works in 1 year, in 2 years, in 3 years, we'll have people around the world saying we need to put more resource and more money into marine research and marine laboratories because they're helping us meet the challenges of society today. So, thank you for listening and see you in October.